Hoy nos sumergimos en un documento que plantea una pregunta incómoda. ¿Puede un tratado militar escrito hace más de 2 milenios explicar las guerras digitales del presente? Bienvenidos a un nuevo Deep Dive de Strategic Labs. Recuerden que tienen los links originales en la descripción.
Yeah, glad to be here for this one.
So picture this. You wake up, it's a random Tuesday morning.
Right.
You grab your phone off the nightstand, you're squinting at the screen, and you open up your favorite social media app.
Like we all do before we even get out of bed, right?
Exactly. And right at the top of your feed is this news story. It's about, I don't know, a massive political scandal or some crazy controversial new law in your city.
Something designed to get a reaction.
Right. It just makes your blood boil. The injustice of it is so blatant that you don't even think, you just immediately hit share.
You're emotionally compromised before you've even had coffee.
Yeah, exactly. You drop a furious comment. You spend your entire 30-minute commute just, like, aggressively arguing with strangers in the replies.
We've all been there.
But here is the thing. What you don't know is that the article you're so mad about, it was synthesized by a server farm halfway across the world.
Yeah.
And the initial 20 comments that got you fired up, they were generated by automated bots.
Completely synthetic outrage.
Right. Your localized anger, that visceral reaction you're having, was the exact strategic objective of a foreign military intelligence unit.
It's chilling to think about it that way.
It is. Because you didn't just read the news this morning. You walked onto a battlefield, you got outmaneuvered, and you lost a skirmish without ever even realizing you were in a war.
I mean, it really is the ultimate invisible conflict.
Yeah.
And honestly, the most unsettling part of that whole scenario isn't even the tech involved.
No.
No, it's the fact that the operational blueprint for what you just described that wasn't written by some modern cyber warfare command.
Right, which brings us to the core of our deep dive today.
Exactly. That blueprint was etched onto bamboo slips in ancient China, like roughly 2,500 years ago.
The Sun Tzu.
By Sun Tzu, in The Art of War.
It's crazy to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Because, we're looking at this huge stack of sources today. We've got cybersecurity threat reports, modern defense white papers, behavioral economics studies.
And they all point straight back to him.
They all point back to The Art of War. But I feel like before we dive into the servers and the algorithms, we really need to ground ourselves in that original context.
For sure. Context is everything here.
Because Sun Tzu was writing during the Warring States period, right? This wasn't some, abstract philosophical debate over tea.
Oh, not at all. It was an era of brutal existential slaughter.
Yeah.
I mean, the Warring States period was defined by these massive armies, protracted sieges, and just a level of resource depletion that was literally bankrupting the states that actually won.
Like, even if you won the battle, your country was ruined.
Exactly. Sun Tzu's philosophy wasn't just about glory. It was born out of intense economic and demographic necessity.
Right, because a prolonged war destroys the victor, too.
He realized that. So for him, the highest form of generalship wasn't winning 100 battles on a bloody field.
It was neutralizing the enemy's capacity to fight, like before the swords were even drawn.
Spot on. The focus completely shifted from physical destruction to psychological manipulation.
But, here is the bridge we need to cross for this deep dive. Sun Tzu couldn't have conceived of electricity.
Let alone artificial intelligence.
Right, or global fiber optic networks. Yet, all our source material today argues that modern state actors and these massive corporate entities are executing his precise strategies.
They really are.
It essentially implies that modern war didn't eliminate classical ideas, it just digitized them.
It digitized them and it automated them.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the fundamental architecture of human conflict, the tools evolve incredibly rapidly, right?
Like going from a bronze spear to a musket.
Right. And the musket is replaced by a guided missile and the missile by a self-replicating malware worm.
But the target stays the same.
Exactly. The psychological target, the human mind, has not evolved.
We're still the same apes we were back then.
Pretty much. The vulnerabilities of human cognition, our cognitive biases, our tribal instincts, our susceptibility to fear and flattery, all of that remains completely static.
It's like humanity upgraded from bronze weaponry to quantum computing hardware. But the psychological operating system of the target hasn't received an update in 2 millennia.
Oh, I like that.
We're essentially running human 1.0 software against 21st century malware.
That is a highly compelling way to frame it, but I would argue it's not just that the target hasn't been updated.
What do you mean?
Well, it's that the modern tools are specifically engineered to bypass our higher reasoning and directly exploit that human 1.0 code.
Oh, wow. So it's intentional.
Highly intentional. Look at antiquity. A general might manage perception by, letting a captured spy escape with false troop numbers.
Right, a classic deception.
But today, managing perception involves manipulating the recommendation engine of a massive video sharing platform.
To feed a specific demographic increasingly polarizing content.
Exactly. The scale and the speed have changed dramatically, but that fundamental exploitation of human trust, it's identical.
Which I think takes us straight into arguably the most famous maxim from The Art of War.
All warfare is based on deception?
All warfare is based on deception.
Right.
But when we talk about the architecture of deception in the digital age, we obviously aren't talking about wooden Trojan horses anymore.
No, we are talking about deepfakes.
Algorithmic propaganda.
Coordinated, inauthentic behavior.
And we really need to understand the mechanism of that deception, I think. Because it's not just about lying, is it?
Not at all. A lie is simple. A lie can be fact-checked and dismissed.
Right.
Modern digital deception is, it's about environment creation.
Environment creation. Tell me more about that.
It's about altering the foundational reality that a population bases its decisions upon.
Wow.
Because the battlefield is no longer a physical valley or a mountain pass. The modern battlefield is the public perception of reality itself.
Okay, let me test an analogy on you based on what the sources are saying.
Sure, go for it.
If all war is deception, are social media platforms essentially the modern equivalent of a smoke bomb?
A smoke bomb.
Yeah, like you drop a massive cloud of chaotic information and nobody can see where the actual geopolitical maneuvers are happening. Does that track?
Oh, it was close. I see where you're going. But a smoke bomb implies a singular chaotic event that blinds everyone equally, right?
Right.
Social media algorithms are more like an endless, highly personalized funhouse mirror.
Oh, a funhouse mirror. That's creepy.
Yeah, they don't obscure your vision with smoke. They distort your reality by reflecting back a hyper-exaggerated version of your own personal fears and desires.
Because the algorithm knows what you want to see.
Exactly. Let's break down the actual mechanism. An algorithm's primary imperative is user retention.
Keeping you on the platform to serve you ads.
Right. And behavioral psychology dictates that human beings linger much longer on content that induces high arousal emotions.
Outrage, fear, moral indignation.
Precisely. Therefore, the algorithm organically learns to prioritize and amplify divisive content.
So state actors understand this mechanical vulnerability, and they just exploit it.
They don't even have to invent a new delivery system for their propaganda. They simply feed highly weaponized, polarizing content into an architecture that is already mathematically designed to distribute it at light speed.
Man, so they are essentially just drafting in the slipstream of surveillance capitalism.
That's exactly what they're doing.
The platforms built this massive delivery system just to sell shoes and streaming subscriptions.
Yeah.
And intelligence agencies realized, hey, we could use the exact same system to destabilize a society.
It's terrifyingly efficient, and the mechanics of the user interface just accelerate this whole process.
Like the share button.
Yes. Think about the share button. It is a masterpiece of frictionless design.
Right. It takes less than half a second to amplify a piece of information to thousands of people.
And that completely removes the temporal friction required for critical thought. You don't have time to process if it's true.
And Sun Tzu said, to deceive the enemy, you must keep them constantly off balance. So the infinite scroll and the frictionless share button, they keep our cognitive defenses perpetually overwhelmed.
Exactly. And this leads to what modern defense analysts call the democratization of deception.
Right. We saw that phrase a lot in the white papers.
Because you no longer need a massive state apparatus, a printing press, or a radio tower to launch a psychological operation.
A small team in a basement can do it.
Literally. A handful of operators using off-the-shelf software can spin up thousands of synthetic personas.
They can create local news websites that look entirely legitimate.
But they're just filled with AI-generated articles designed to slowly inject a specific narrative into a local community.
And we see this deployed across the entire geopolitical spectrum. I think it's crucial to state right here for our listeners that we are looking at this from a purely strategic perspective.
Absolutely.
The tactics of algorithmic deception are utilized by actors globally. They are targeting populations on the left, the right, and the center.
The mechanism doesn't care about the ideology. It only cares about the psychological leverage it can exert.
Right. But here is where I get stuck on the logistics of this whole operation.
Okay, where?
To deceive someone, that effectively to tailor that funhouse mirror perfectly to their specific psychological vulnerabilities, you have to know exactly who you are deceiving.
You do?
If you just blast random propaganda out there, it's inefficient.
Yeah.
You have to know your target.
Which introduces the next critical pillar of Sun Tzu's philosophy. He said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Know the enemy. Right. And translating that into the 21st century takes us straight into the realm of mass data collection, behavioral surplus, and predictive analytics.
Yeah. Because in ancient warfare, knowing the enemy meant, understanding their supply lines.
Right. Or troop morale, the temperament of their general.
But today,
Right.
knowing the enemy means having a mathematically precise map of their psychological vulnerabilities.
It's wild.
It means analyzing their digital footprint to such a granular degree that you can predict their behavior better than they can predict it themselves.
Let's get into the mechanics of how that actually works, because I think this is where the abstract concept of data turns into a very tangible weapon.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the Cambridge Analytica case study from our sources, and not just as a historical event, but as like the proof of concept for this entire methodology.
It really was the proof of concept.
Because we all know the headline, right? They harvested data.
Yeah.
But how did that data become a weapon?
Right. To understand the weaponization, we have to look at the psychometric models they employed. Specifically, the OCEAN model.
The big 5 personality traits.
Exactly. OCEAN stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay, so psychologists have long known that if you can map a person on these 5 spectrums, you can predict with startling accuracy how they will respond to certain stimuli.
Right. And what Cambridge Analytica did was combine the OCEAN model with the massive data sets available through Facebook's API at the time.
But wait, this is the leap that I think a lot of people struggle to make. How does clicking on a picture of a golden retriever or, a local pizza place translate into a deep psychological profile?
It's all about correlative machine learning.
Correlate machine learning. Break that down for us.
So by taking a seed group of people who had taken extensive psychological surveys and then mapping those survey results against their everyday Facebook activity, the algorithm learned to spot hidden patterns.
Patterns that humans wouldn't ever notice.
Never. It might mathematically discover that a high percentage of men who like a specific brand of motor oil and a certain late-night comedian also happen to score incredibly high in neuroticism and low in openness to new experiences.
Wow.
So once the machine learning model has established thousands of these microcorrelations, it no longer needs you to take a survey.
It just watches what you do.
Exactly. It just needs to look at your digital exhaust, your likes, your dwell time on a video, your location data, and it can instantly assign you an OCEAN score.
So once they have that score, they truly know the enemy. They know exactly what buttons to push.
Yes. If the system identifies a block of voters who are, say, highly agreeable, but also highly neurotic.
Meaning they're eager to please, but deeply fearful of threats.
Right. A strategic operator will not serve them a boring advertisement about tax policy.
No, they'll serve them a hyper-targeted, visceral ad about an impending threat to their specific community.
Exactly. They are bypassing the rational debate entirely and directly interfacing with the target's specific psychological vulnerabilities.
It's the ultimate invisible espionage. I mean, a traditional spy, like a double agent during the Cold War.
Right, like something out of a movie.
Yeah, they could only observe what you did in public, or maybe what you said in a bugged room.
True.
But algorithmic espionage observes what you do when you think you are completely alone.
Oh, that's a great point.
It monitors the impulsive queries you type into a search engine at 2 in the morning.
Yep.
It tracks how many milliseconds you hover over an image of an ex-partner before scrolling past.
It maps your insecurities, your hypocrisies, your hidden desires.
It doesn't just look through the keyhole. It catalogs the entire contents of your mind.
And Shoshana Zuboff extensively explores this in her work on surveillance capitalism.
Right, which was a huge part of our reading for this deep dive.
It's a vital companion to understanding modern conflict. She talks about this concept of behavioral surplus.
Behavioral surplus?
Yeah, the platforms don't just collect enough data to improve their services. They collect vast amounts of excess data.
Like your tone of voice, your typing cadence, your micro expressions.
Exactly. specifically to feed these predictive models.
Wow.
So when state actors or hybrid warfare operators tap into this ecosystem, they are utilizing an intelligence apparatus that would have made the KGB or the Stasi just weep with envy.
And the most brilliant part, strategically speaking,
What's that?
is that the target population voluntarily builds and funds the surveillance infrastructure themselves.
Oh, yeah. Simply by buying smartphones and using free apps, we pay for the privilege of being surveilled.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so we have the architecture of deception in place, and we have an impossibly detailed intelligence profile of the target.
Right.
We know what they fear, and we have the tools to show them a funhouse mirror of that fear. What is the ultimate objective? Because if you look at the major geopolitical maneuvers of the last decade, we aren't really seeing massive tank battles between superpowers.
And that is exactly according to Sun Tzu's design.
Right.
The objective brings us to his definition of the supreme victory. He writes, "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting."
Breaking resistance without fighting. This right here is the foundation of what our sources call hybrid warfare.
Yes.
You know, I used an analogy earlier in my notes when I was prepping for this. I was thinking about termites versus a wrecking ball.
Okay.
But thinking about it now with what we've discussed, that's not quite right. Termites just eat the wood. Hybrid warfare feels much more insidious.
How so?
It's less like an invading army and more like an autoimmune disease.
Oh, wow. An autoimmune disease is the perfect biological equivalent.
Right, because an autoimmune disease doesn't introduce a massive external pathogen to destroy the body. It tricks the body's own immune system into attacking healthy tissue.
That's exactly what happens.
In hybrid warfare, a foreign actor doesn't send bombers to destroy your institutions. They use manipulated information and psychological pressure to trick your own citizens, your own media, your own legal systems into tearing each other apart.
The society destroys itself.
And the attacker just watches from a server farm thousands of miles away.
Let's actually look at the mechanical anatomy of this autoimmune attack because it operates simultaneously across multiple vectors.
Right, it's not just one thing.
No, hybrid warfare blends conventional military posturing with irregular tactics. You have economic manipulation, diplomatic subversion, cyberattacks, and intense informational sabotage.
And the goal is to keep the conflict sub-threshold, right?
Exactly. Sub-threshold. You apply enough pressure to paralyze the enemy, but you keep the attacks ambiguous and deniable enough that it never triggers a conventional military response.
Like it never triggers a NATO Article 5 declaration.
Precisely, because if it does, you've crossed into kinetic war, and you've failed Sun Tzu's primary directive.
Okay, we need to make this concrete for the listener.
Yeah.
Let's walk through the 2015 cyber attack on the Ukrainian power grid.
The sandworm attack.
Yes, by the group known as Sandworm. Because this wasn't just a theoretical white paper. This was a live fire demonstration of breaking an enemy's infrastructure without firing a single kinetic weapon.
The sandworm attack is a masterclass in sub-threshold warfare. It really is.
So set the scene for us.
Okay, it's December 2015. In the middle of a freezing winter, parts of Ukraine suddenly went dark.
Hundreds of thousands of people lost power.
Right. But a bomb didn't hit a substation. The mechanism of the attack actually started months earlier.
With spear phishing emails.
Right. Exactly. Emails sent to employees of the power companies. The emails contained malicious Microsoft Word attachments.
Someone always clicks.
Always. When an employee opened the attachment, it installed malware called Black Energy, giving the hackers a silent backdoor into the IT network.
But so they are inside the corporate network. That's just office computers. That doesn't control the power grid itself.
Right.
How did they jump from accounting to the actual industrial control systems?
Well, they were patient. They spent months quietly mapping the network, harvesting credentials, and learning exactly how the systems operated.
Just lurking in the background.
Yep. They eventually acquired the VPN credentials used by the grid operators to remotely manage the SCADA systems.
And SCADA is the actual software that controls the physical circuit breakers, right?
Exactly. So when the day of the attack came, the hackers didn't just automate a shutdown script.
What did they do?
They remotely logged into the control panels, took control of the operators' cursors, and began manually clicking the circuit breakers off one by one.
Wait. So the human operators are just sitting in the control room,
Just watching their mouse cursors move across the screens on their own.
completely helpless to stop it. That is terrifying.
And they didn't just turn off the lights. The genius and the terror of the attack was the holistic nature of the sabotage.
Because they attack the recovery process, too.
Right. While they were turning off the power, they simultaneously wiped the servers using a destructive malware called Kill Disk.
Which means the operators couldn't just reboot the systems.
Exactly. And it gets worse. They overwrote the firmware on the serial to Ethernet converters at the substations.
Meaning what?
Meaning the operators couldn't issue remote commands even if they somehow got the servers back up. They literally had to drive out to the substations in the snow to manually flip the physical switches back on.
Oh my God.
And as a final touch of psychological warfare...
There's more?
Yeah. They launched a coordinated denial of service attack against the utilities call centers.
A DDoS attack.
Yep. So when citizens woke up in the freezing dark and tried to call to find out what was happening, the lines were completely jammed.
It is the absolute embodiment of Sun Tzu.
Total synchronization.
You induce panic, you cripple the infrastructure, you demonstrate total dominance, and you completely erode the civilian population's trust in their government's ability to protect them.
And the financial cost to the attackers was what? The price of a few laptops and internet connections?
Wow! Compare that to the cost of deploying a squadron of fighter jets to bomb those substations.
Not even in the same universe. The kinetic attack risks pilots' lives, it costs millions of dollars in munitions, and it instantly unifies the international community against you as a clear act of war.
But the cyber attack achieved the exact same strategic outcome, paralyzing the region and demoralizing the population.
But it was wrapped in a layer of digital fog that delayed attribution and paralyzed any international response. Supreme excellence.
But, the infrastructure is only one front. We mentioned economic manipulation earlier. How does this autoimmune strategy apply to the financial sector?
Well, economic hybrid warfare involves weaponizing financial interdependencies.
Give me an example.
Say, a rival nation is heavily reliant on a specific raw material or maybe an energy export. You can manipulate markets, flood supply chains, or orchestrate targeted short-selling campaigns against key industries.
So you hurt their wallet without firing a shot.
Right. You can also fund proxy groups or extremist political movements within the target country.
Oh, this happens a lot.
Yeah, by secretly funneling dark money into hyper-partisan think tanks or protest movements, you artificially amplify domestic friction.
And the more the citizens are fighting each other over manufactured domestic crises,
the less attention and political capital the government has to oppose your geopolitical maneuvers abroad.
This radically reshapes our entire understanding of geography. Which I think brings us to the final major shift we need to unpack today.
Redefining the terrain.
Redefining the terrain. Because in the art of war, understanding the terrain is non-negotiable.
It's everything.
Sun Tzu wrote endlessly about knowing when to fight in a valley, how to position your troops relative to the sun, the dangers of marshland.
Because terrain dictates the flow of battle. If you control the high ground, gravity does half the work for you.
Right.
If you force your enemy into a narrow pass, their superior numbers are instantly neutralized. The laws of physics dictate the strategy.
But the laws of physics don't apply to the modern terrain. Geopolitics is no longer just played on a physical map. According to our research, there are now 4 distinct simultaneous fronts.
Let's break them down.
Okay, first, the traditional physical terrain. Land, sea, air, and space.
Right.
Second, the economic terrain, global financial systems and supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
Third, the digital terrain,
mm-hmm.
the physical cables, servers, and code that actually make up the internet.
And fourth, the most abstract and arguably the most critical, the cognitive terrain.
The minds of the population.
Exactly. And the cognitive terrain is where the concept of high ground becomes incredibly fascinating.
How so?
Well, in the digital age, the high ground is algorithmic dominance.
Right.
If you control the search engine algorithms, the social media recommendation engines, or the underlying digital infrastructure of a nation's communication network, you hold the ultimate high ground.
Okay, let me push back on you a bit there.
Sure.
If I'm a modern defense strategist, right, I know how to defend a physical border.
Sure, you put a radar installation on a hill.
I patrol the coastline. I inspect cargo at the ports.
Standard physical defense.
But how on earth do you defend the cognitive border?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because it exists inside the minds of millions of individual citizens, and the invading force is just a stream of data packets traveling through privately owned fiber optic cables.
That is the great unsolved crisis of modern democratic governance. And it is exactly what modern defense scholars are agonizing over right now.
Because you can't just shoot down an idea.
No, you can't. Now, authoritarian states, they have a simpler, albeit draconian, answer to defending their cognitive terrain.
They just build a digital wall.
Exactly. They create sovereign internets, they outright ban foreign platforms, and they heavily censor domestic communication.
They treat information as a strictly controlled state asset.
But an open democracy cannot do that without destroying the very foundation of what makes it a democracy in the first place.
Right, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the open exchange of ideas. Those are structural requirements.
Precisely. Open societies are inherently asymmetric when fighting an information war.
Wow, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. The very freedoms that make a democracy vibrant and innovative are the exact vulnerabilities that hybrid warfare exploits.
A hostile actor can just use an open society's freedom of speech to inject a virus of disinformation.
And the society's own legal framework prevents it from excising that virus.
This is exactly why the cartography of this new terrain isn't being done by traditional generals pointing at paper maps.
No, they're way behind.
We have an entirely new ecosystem of think tanks, investigators, and authors trying to map the cognitive battlefield.
We do, and our sources highlight several key institutions leading this charge.
Like the RAND Corporation and CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. What are they actually looking at?
Well, these organizations have had to pivot massively. RAND, which was, famous for nuclear deterrence theory during the Cold War.
Right, mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, well, now they dedicate massive resources to studying what they call truth decay.
Truth decay. Love that term.
It's brilliant. It's their term for the diminishing role of facts and objective analysis in public life, driven largely by algorithmic polarization.
And what about CSIS?
CSIS maps the digital and physical hybrid terrain. They analyze vulnerabilities in everything from undersea fiber optic cables to the supply chains of semiconductor manufacturing.
Because they understand that if you control the hardware that runs the code, you control the terrain.
Exactly. And even NATO itself has structurally adapted to this.
Oh, right. They established the Strategic Communications Center of Excellence.
In Riga, Latvia.
Just think about that. An entire massive military alliance creating a center specifically to study how communication, means, and narrative structures are used strategically as weapons.
It shows how seriously they're taking the cognitive terrain. And we also can't ignore the open source intelligence community.
Like Bellingcat. Let's explain Bellingcat, because their methodology is basically a perfect example of modern intelligence gathering.
Oh, Bellingcat is fascinating. They operate entirely on the digital terrain.
They don't have classified clearance or secret agents on the ground.
No, they use OSINT, open source intelligence.
Right.
They solve incredibly complex geopolitical crimes like, famously, identifying the specific Russian military unit that shot down Flight MH17 over Ukraine.
And how do they do it without spies?
By analyzing public satellite imagery, scraping thousands of social media posts, geolocating the shadows in random YouTube videos, and cross-referencing leaked databases.
They are effectively using the massive data exhaust of the modern world to pierce the fog of hybrid war.
Exactly. They use the enemy's own digital footprint against them. It's brilliant.
And alongside these institutions, our sources lean heavily on several foundational texts that really act as modern spiritual successors to the art of war.
We already mentioned Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism,
which explains the economic engine behind the data harvesting. But we also have Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media by P.W. Singer and Emerson Brooking.
Like War is essential reading because it argues that the internet is essentially the nervous system of modern commerce and culture, and that nervous system has been completely weaponized.
It treats a viral hashtag with the exact same strategic gravity as a troop deployment.
And it should.
And then there is Thomas Ridd's book, Cyber War Will Not Take Place, which, sounds totally contradictory to everything we've just spent an hour discussing.
It does sound like a contradiction.
But his argument is actually much more nuanced when you dig into it.
Yes, Ridd's argument isn't that cyberattacks don't happen. His argument is semantic, but it's strategically vital.
Explain that.
He argues that what we call cyber war doesn't actually meet the classic Clausewitzian definition of war, which fundamentally requires lethal physical force.
Okay, so if it's not war, what is it?
Ridd argues that all of these cyber and informational attacks are acts of espionage, sabotage, and subversion. They are designed specifically to avoid becoming a traditional war while still achieving total strategic dominance.
Which brings us right back to the beginning. They are the ultimate manifestation of Sun Tzu's doctrine of winning without fighting.
Full circle.
It is a completely new vocabulary for a completely new reality. I mean, we are talking about sub-threshold sabotage, cognitive terrain, open-source intelligence, and autoimmune informational attacks.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Yet underneath all of this blinding technological complexity, the structural foundation is a philosophy written 2,500 years ago by a campfire.
It's pretty profound when you step back and look at it.
So how do we synthesize all of this? As we pull back from the server farms and the algorithms and the think tanks, what is the core lesson for the listener?
Well, I think the overarching realization is this. Sun Tzu's true legacy isn't just a manual for moving troops on a physical chessboard.
Right.
It is a timeless framework for understanding the nature of power, perception, and human vulnerability.
It teaches us that the most dangerous, the most effective, and the most devastating conflicts are the ones that the target never even perceives are happening.
If you wait for the sound of artillery to realize you are in a war, you have already lost.
Because the modern battlefield doesn't smell like cordite. It looks like a push notification.
Spot on.
And that is the crucial takeaway for you listening to this deep dive right now. You are not just a passive observer of geopolitics.
Far from it.
By virtue of holding a smartphone and participating in the digital economy, you are actively navigating this terrain every single day.
Every time you engage with polarizing content.
Every time your emotional biases are triggered by a hyper-targeted ad.
Every time you share an unverified narrative just because it perfectly aligns with your worldview.
You are interacting with the mechanics of this invisible conflict. You aren't just standing on the battlefield, you are the terrain.
And acknowledging that personal vulnerability is really the first step in defending the cognitive border.
Right. Critical thinking, digital hygiene, and just healthy skepticism of our own emotional reactions. Those are the only shields we have in a war of deception.
They're our only defense.
Which leaves us with a rather chilling extrapolation to consider as we close this out.
Let's hear it.
If the absolute goal of perfect warfare, the supreme excellence that Sun Tzu wrote about, is to entirely break the enemy's resistance without them ever realizing they were fighting.
Yeah.
How do any of us know if we haven't already surrendered?
That's a heavy thought to leave off on.
It is. Do you think modern democracies are truly prepared to face wars based purely on manipulation and information? Llegamos al final de ese extenso análisis. Si de sumo valor, compartan y suscríbanse a Strategic Labs. Hasta la próxima.